Hi everyone, it's another episode of Guiding Voices where we celebrate mentorship, perseverance, and the transformative power of education. Today we have one of our mentors with us, is by name Dr. Tolu Adesina. Dr. Tolu Adesina is the Managing Innovating Consultant with Winnovate Consulting in Canada. He leads innovation advisory for client organizations from ideation to implementation, ensuring that there is alignment with companies' objectives and the market needs. Dr. Adesina had his first degree, his master's and PhD in Nigeria before he moved to Canada to start his postdoctoral fellowship at the University of British Columbia. Right now, he runs the company Winnovate Consulting in Canada. We are so privileged to have him to come discuss his many struggles, challenges, and especially triumphs in being able to merge his academic experience or educational experience from moving from Africa then down to Canada. So welcome with us, Dr. Tolu. Dr. Tolu, welcome. It's a honor to have you here. I'm so blessed to have you. Dr. Tolu has mentored over that I know, and they're taking masters abroad, 50 students, and over 1,000 he has been able to teach both in Nigeria and in Canada. It's such a honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. For me, it's a privilege to be able to sort of speak to my experiences and sort of provide some sort of light for those who are trying to walk the same path that we have walked. Of course, for us, we've had people who walked that path. We sort of saw their light, we lived in their light, and I think it's just okay to give the same back to the people coming behind us.
Thank you so much, sir. And so I'll start my first question. How has it been having to go through education back in Nigeria? And by the way, you had your first degree physics, master's and PhD electrical engineering, and here you are in Canada, in consulting after your postdoctoral fellowship. How has the journey been?
Well, so far that looks like a journey of about almost 20 years now. About 17. 19 years. 19 years, 20 years now. It's been challenging, it's been rewarding, it's been exciting, and I think a new horizon is unfolding for me. But to specifically talk about that journey, I would say that with many of us who sort of studied natural sciences or physical sciences in Nigeria and then engineering, there is a perennial problem that we have. I remember about 10 years ago, I was speaking to a colleague of mine. We finished together from the university, first degree, and he moved to Canada for a master's degree. And I spoke to him, then I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And he said, "Friend, we were scammed." Now that came to me like a shock. I'm like, "Hey, come on! You had a first class from the university. You finished from physics with electronics. How would you say you were scammed?" And he said to me, "There's a wide gap between what we thought we knew to be science and engineering and what the reality is, in the West, right?" And I've always known that, given the fact that, while I was teaching, I usually leveraged materials and sources from professors, from North America, a lot of them. I always knew that we were still, a wide way away, like from where they are, right? So for me, I think what was helpful for me was having that foresight, right? And having in mind that potentially someday I will make a switch between a third world country like Nigeria, as it were, and the first world country. And so I began to tailor my interests, my focus, towards what I felt was obtainable, right? I remember, talking to one of my colleagues about 12 or 14 years ago, and then he was asking me, "Hey, how come you're not writing papers like everyone is writing papers and publishing papers? And I said to him, it doesn't make sense to write papers because I want to get promotion if I don't have anything concrete to research about, anything concrete to, sort of, present in a paper, and that will eventually not sit on the shelf, but that will have value for, for the economy, value for industries, then I would rather not write a paper, right? And interestingly for me, that became the issue, right? But in any case, just sort of put this to a head. I earlier on, after my first degree, I began to tailor my research, interests and pursuits, around what I felt at the time was, themes that covered, the majority of what I see as, frontline research, going by the, research outputs of professors outside Nigeria, right? And so that helped me to sort of, change my perspective, to what works, or to what would eventually work for me, right? And I remember that, for me getting a postdoc, and it's interesting because my postdoc began with a LinkedIn friend request, and that's interesting because so there is this platform called My Tax in Canada, where there is a list of research projects that companies want to sort of do, and they're looking to connect with professors and students and postdocs who could be of help to them. And I found this particular project that was quite a close call to the area I focused off my PhD back in Nigeria. And the area I focused on my PhD was, again, based off of the choice of what exists and what is obtainable in research, outside of these lines, right? And so it made me, sort of see the relevance of what I did with what the company was trying to do. And I reached out to the CEO and the head of engineering on LinkedIn, and well, like they said, the rest is history. And that was the basis of getting a postdoctoral research fellowship in Canada, right? So if there's any one thing I'll say that sort of helped me to get past, that chasm, that chasm between, the experience in Nigeria and here, I think it would be that willingness to stretch beyond what was prevalent around me, and to sort of look more into, what was obtainable in this, in the West in terms of research.
Thank you for that. That was very detailed. Because it's already covered up until your postdoctoral fellowship in Canada. You've had the privilege of teaching in Nigeria and in Canada, and both in engineering spaces. And I wanted you to just speak upon learning environments, teaching styles, and expectation between the African and Western education systems.
Okay, that's a very interesting twist somewhere around there. So there are two perspectives for me. There is the perspective of the instructor, the teacher, or the professor, and there is a perspective of the student. Now, sometimes challenges toughen one. Challenges sort of brings the best out of you, right? Adversity, they say, sort of, hardens you. So I guess in Nigeria, so let me speak first from the perspective of the student, right? The student who is being taught. Students in Nigeria generally are more motivated to learn and to sort of explore what lies beyond. Well, not everybody, but you get a good sense of people who just really have this motivation. And there is this part of things that also changes the dynamics the power index in Nigeria is way greater than the power index in the West, right? And so students look up to you as a professor, as a teacher, as somebody of authority, and you had the ability to sort of make or mar, their learning experiences and what they get out of the university with, right? So it sort of puts that level of regard and some bit of fear, right, in there, and so the student feels like, hey, whatever this man says, I need to pay attention to it. But on the flip side is students sometimes also tend to take what you say as the ultimate and the authority, and they don't necessarily check it up to see well, what this person is presenting, does it make sense? Is it right? Is it true or not? On the flip side, here in Canada, the students are very assertive. The students are very, open-minded, but also they're very inquisitive. They will challenge you, right? So while that is not the case back in Nigeria, and it's the case here, it does make for a shift in the approach. So back in Nigeria, as a professor, as a university lecturer, you could just pick up the notes of your professor, and then use that to go and teach a class, and just spend, the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes before the lecture to look through what you want to go and present, and then go. No one's going to ask you. No one will call you the question. No one is going to, evaluate your teaching, right, from the student's perspective. But here in Canada, it's a completely different experience. Students will evaluate you, and the student's evaluation of what you do, of your teaching, is the greatest thing that matters to the university, right? And of course, for me, I think there was a culture shock. Back in Nigeria, assignments that you give out to students, no one's going to ask you, hey, Prof, have you marked an assignment? Or raise an issue and say, hey, he gave an assignment out, you didn't mark the assignment, you didn't give us a marking scheme. But in Canada, you have to supply all of that. And you give assignments, giving them assignments, they will turn the assignments in the week. You must mark the assignments and report their scores back to them, and give them marking guides to show them where they have missed things out, and where they've done well. And they can call you to question, they can call you out as a professor, right? If you're not doing things, on a very transparent level, right? Anyways, saying that, I'll say that teaching in Canada is way different from what is in Nigeria. There is the depth of teaching that comes into play here in Canada, in the West, than what you find in Nigeria. And that's because, again, you are going to be evaluated. Someone will call you out if you don't do the right thing, right? And that's important, right? Whereas in Nigeria, we don't have any of those checks and balances. For the most part, professors are kings. They are the ones, whatever they say, just take it and just go. Even if you feel they're wrong, don't even try to question them. If you do, well, good luck to you.
So thank you for that. What I take away from that is that there is an accountability system in the West that makes a professor accountable for the teaching assignments that you have been given. And also, you notice also when you submit a syllabus in the West, you cannot do anything outside of that syllabus, even if you want to change your mind.
No, you cannot. Okay. No, you cannot. It's a contract.
It's a contract.
You and the student.
And I think, and that's key, right? That's key in creating that environment that the students feel valued, they feel empowered and understood. Absolutely. And understood. So I think that's missing in our space, and we hope to change that from our generation forward. Anyways, so I know you've answered my next question too, because the biggest your cultural shock, like that cultural adjustment, and you just said it now, that was a shock for you. the fact that you have no power.
Yeah,
you have no. You think
basically.
they tell you have all the power, but you don't. You really,
And you have
you
no
really,
power.
you really
You
don't.
have no power. So
So
in
I
terms of
would.
cultural, oh yeah, go ahead.
No. You go ahead, sir.
I mean, in terms of cultural shock, right? I think one of the biggest cultural shocks I experienced was, you know, a couple of weeks till the midterm examination, and the students, were outraged that I didn't give them a formula sheet, and I was first lost. I'm like, excuse me. I was lost for words, and I had to go and talk to the chair of the program and said, "These kids are asking for formula sheet," and he's like, "Oh, you should give that to them from the start of the term." I'm like, "No way, no. I mean, no way." Back in Nigeria. No, come on. What is the formula sheet? It's as good as saying, well, this is the exam question, go and solve it. Right? Yeah, so that for me was a very big cultural shock. It was completely shocking. And anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and I realized that formula sheet. Well, it's not. I would say maybe my experience is different. So by the time I started teaching, and I've always known that formula sheet, obviously from studies, that formula sheet has always been a challenge to professors that have taught me before. So the first thing I let them know is that start to write your formula sheet from now, because you will be bringing your own formula sheets into the examination hall, because I do not know what you don't know. I do not know what you're able to remember now. You are different students in the class, so you bring your formula sheet. So it's on you. It's on you to bring your formula sheets and not on me. So they know from the beginning of the term that it's on them. So it's your business to write the formula you know and the formula you don't know, or whatever way you choose for it to be. And then you are expected to submit your formula sheet with your final exam question. And that would also be the text. So again, that you just when people say people creative, teaching is also a very creative space. You need to be able to be very creative, because students are extremely creative. They can catch you from any loophole. Any small space you put in, they're going to catch you and they nail you down on that. But anyways, thank you for sharing that with us. So were there specific gaps in knowledge and skills you had to address, or when you made that move, or how did you even approach filling those gaps?
Right.
So maybe technically, and all the soft skills wise and stuff like that.
All right. For me, there were gaps for sure, but these were gaps that I was not unaware of. If you remember, I mentioned when I started that a lot of my teaching, I sort of used a lot of material from professors outside of the Nigerian, climate. I used a lot of lecture materials from schools like MIT, Stanford, and Caltech, right? And so all of those materials sort of exposed me to the gaps that were there in knowledge, right? So for me, and interestingly, the material I used to teach here in Canada was a textbook I'd used as far as back as my master's degree time. So, it was a material I was familiar with. I'd used that material before. I've also used the material to teach back in Nigeria, which is unlike the situation, that you find generally across the country. Okay, so in terms of the knowledge gaps between what I knew based on my learning and what I required to teach, I knew the gaps were there, but these were gaps I was already aware of, and I had taken time to fill those gaps, at least to a good extent. But of course, teaching is a completely different ballgame entirely from learning, and So of course, those gaps. I mean, I remember that I had to still go back to take some other lectures from other professors, listen to them, and see how they approached, problems and things like that, to prepare myself for the classes.
And that will bring me to my question, because I see that you did a lot of work in being able to bridge your gap. And I always say to people that, obviously, I think that's a common knowledge, that when a madman knows he's mad, I think he's already well. I think the first step to making a change or getting better at something is realizing that you don't know. And I think that is quite missing amidst us, especially educators back home in Africa, that a whole lot of people have failed to realize that they do not know, and have failed to realize that there is a gap, or there might be a gap. Gap may be in knowledge, or gap may be in knowledge and delivery of the knowledge to students. So I would say that, how has your diverse educational background influenced the way you mentor students, particularly those from Africa? Because I know you do that. You are very rooted in mentorship and being able to help people that are looking to have that Western experience in a Western space, not just Western experience back in Africa, but they want to be able to come here. What has been that your diverse educational background? How has it helped you in mentoring the students?
Right, interesting. So, in terms of my background, there are different parts to my background. There is my educational background, there is my work experience background, and I think I've always been that, exception to the rule in terms of the kind of workspaces I've found myself, the kind of, things I've done in the past. So, for example, I remember someone asking me, how did you get into software development? You had a first degree in physics, and I mean, there's no correlation. And I said, and in fact, I remember that back in the university, my university days, in my first year, I took a course in programming. In my final year, I took a course in web development. And my colleagues who were in computer science felt like, why the trouble? Why would you do that? There is no basis for that. And for me, it was because I had early on identified areas where I wanted to find, myself resourceful and useful and be able to do a lot of work. And of course, even while I was a student in the university, I was involved, in a lot of computer, solutions work, right, for clients, for faculty members in the university, for colleagues and all of that, right? So I'm moving on from the university. For my first degree, I was studying for a master's. I was teaching as an assistant, a teaching assistant, but I was also working as a consultant. I had my personal consultancy that I, through which I delivered, IT solutions to organizations and to individuals, right? So I kind of have that very vivid background. Now, what I did for me was to help me realize that you need more than the training that you get in the classroom to become a whole man, to become a total man, to become someone who is well-rounded, well-versed, and who's able to meet the demands of the work industry, right, upon leaving the university, right? But many students don't realize this. And so what I do oftentimes in my classroom is, whatever course it is I'm teaching, I try to help students see how what I'm teaching becomes relevant in the work world. And very quickly, they begin to realize that what I'm teaching is not just sufficient. There is a portal that is opened and you can see where it applies, but you need much more than that to get to that space of relevance in the industry. And so the way I work with them is more like I help them see for themselves that there is a whole lot more that you can take on. And I remember that in 2017, I started an internship program with my consulting company at the time, and I hired interns from the university where I worked and from other universities. And it's interesting because one of those, some of these, guys who were in the program at the time, one of them today is a software developer and is a vice president with Goldman Sachs in London. Another, leads the tech work for one of the fintech companies in Nigeria. And for all of them and the rest of those who, too many to mention, one thing they would always take away from the internship program was that it is more than the physics 101 and the computer 205 that you take in the university to make you a total man and to make you relevant in the industry. And so you need to carve out your path. You need to figure out, where do I want to be? What skills do I have? What talents do I have? And how do I tailor all of this and bring them together to get me to where I want to be? Right? So I think that's the approach I've always taken. I take them out of the classroom for a bit and help them see how it operates in the industry. So for example, I taught a course in wireless communication, in telecommunications for about 2 or 3 years back at Belgium University. And I think I was the first person who introduced field trips to that course. And I took the students to, on a field trip to the company that I worked for, and the telecoms company I worked for in Nigeria at the time, right before I, came back to the university again. And interesting because one of those students, who was one of the Kano scholars, eventually went on to do his, internship during NYSC with that company. And for him, he would always remember that, thank God from Tolulope for what it did. It opened my eyes to see that there is a whole lot more beyond this, and I need to carve the path out myself to figure out what do I need to be where I want to be. I don't know if I've been able to answer the question that you.
Yes, you did. And my takeaway also from there is that there is more to becoming a well-rounded professional than just your degrees or your certificates or certifications, as the case may be.
Absolutely.
There are skills that are needed, very soft skills, that are needed for you to be able to be a well-rounded professional. And that's why sometimes we see the performance of people that actually graduated, the difference between people that graduated top of their class and bottom of their class, because then that soft skills then plays a big role. Seeing those people that we think didn't graduate well doing exceedingly well, even more than those people that graduated tops of their class. So
absolutely,
what makes you a global person, or maybe of global relevance in your professional space, includes both your academic prowess and then those soft skills that then you're able to gather over the years. So thank you for that. And then I have a question. Then how can educators, and I mean teachers, professors, because you've touched a very, very big point, and it's part of what we're going to see for people that will see our social media place. We're working on what teaching is. And from what you just said now, it's realizing that mentorship is at the heart of teaching, right? Is at the heart of teaching. And that's what makes great teachers, right? So how can educators in Africa adapt best practices from Western education systems while still maintaining cultural relevance? And when I mean cultural relevance in that space is that earlier on when we started this conversation, you spoke about students having reverence for the professor. That respect is there, but it begins to translate to fear of not being able to speak up, fear of not being able to ask for what you need, fear of not even being able to say, excuse me, sir, there might be a problem with the equation you have solved. So how can these educators, and I mean educators in this space includes teachers, lecturers, as we would have the case may be in Africa, as we always say, or even professors, as the case may be, right? How can they, adapt best practices from the Western systems?
Right. Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to say is this. Many professors, many university lecturers, suffer from that issue that revolves around you know, imposter syndrome and the feeling of inadequacy. And so in a bid to sort of cover that over, they sort of become, in some cases, high-handed, or they just are closed-minded, right, to whatever the students have to say or bring forward. So I think the first thing I want to say to, professors or to lecturers or teachers in Africa is, first of all, have a good estimate of yourself. Where are you? Where do you stand? What gaps are there for you in your learning? And oftentimes, I think I remember when I was at Covenant University, on the courses I taught there, I told the students in the class, listen up guys, I don't know everything. And I can make mistakes. So if you ever catch a mistake, please call my attention to it. I mean, that's the purpose of erratas, right? People who write books, they will tell you there's an errata or there is a revision of the book, and then people come back and say, oh, well, there's an error here, and then we sort of got that, and oh yeah, thank you for catching that error, and then they will make a change. And that's because there is no one who is infallible. So I'll tell lecturers, have a good estimate of yourself. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, do a gap analysis. Do a SWOT analysis, if I want to use the terminology from business analysis and innovation. Do a SWOT analysis. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? And what are your threats? Right, some of them are intrinsic, some are extrinsic. Check it out. Now, when you have a good estimate of yourself, fill the gaps that are there. Many people are very lazy to sort of make a change on themselves. Now, this problem is multifaceted. And I'll tell you why. I once had a colleague who had a PhD and who had to go sell bread in the morning before he comes to teach in the university. Now, the question is, why should a PhD first have to go sell bread, in the morning? And that's because the economics doesn't make sense for him. He's got a family, he's got kids, he's got a wife, he's got to pay bills, right? And if that's the situation and the salary that comes in doesn't cover the bills, what does it do? So that's one thing, right? And that's why I said that this challenge is multifaceted. Some people do know, where the gaps are, but their take home can't even take them home. So they have to find ways to sort of deal with that first. Now, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, the very least is that existentialism, where all the basic needs are met: food, shelter, clothing. Now, if a professor can't even meet those needs, now you can be sure that he will never get to the height of self-actualization. And to get there, you need to be self-aware. Know where you are at, know who you are, know your makeup and stuff like that, right? So I think this challenge, can be addressed from the perspectives of policies that affect the universities and affect hiring and affect remuneration for university professors, university lecturers back in Nigeria and back in Africa, right? Now, this might not be the same problem across all of Africa, but it's a very perennial problem in West Africa, right? And so that, again, is some part of, things where the issues need to be addressed. But back to the individual, the lecturer, the professor needs to know or be aware of where they are at. Now, when you know where you are at, then you need to make steps and make efforts towards making a change to get to where you should be, where you want to be. Now, when you have that good sense of self-awareness, then becoming vulnerable becomes easier. And so you need to be very vulnerable and open. Sometimes you might have to deal with disrespect and deal with, disdain, some students will take you for granted, no doubt. I remember that, after a particular exam, one day, back at Belgium University, this is about some 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I was walking past the student hostel, and from their hostel began to shout and said to me, "Are you an angel? You think you are an angel? What do you think you're doing?" Right? And that's because I didn't condone exam malpractice in the examination hall. Right? So, and then sometime before that, some of them sent me a death threat by text message. Right? And things like that. But of course, there are others who sort of appreciate what I bring that is different to the table. Right? So, of course, the point is be open, be willing to be vulnerable, and then make effort to look beyond the material you're presenting. Before, yeah. So before you go to the class, so you have a course to teach. You will teach this course in 2 months and 3 months. First of all, go and check what's new in this space. How are people approaching this particular course? If you rely on the notes you used in 1975 and 1982 and 1991, you are going to be feeding the students with stale food at best, if not poison, if you know what I mean, right? So it's important to sort of, and that's the reason why textbooks have revisions, right? Because things are changing. You need to be up to date. Now, many professors don't even bother to give students, reading materials or recommend materials for them to go read from. And there's no way in this world that you will teach an engineering course within the space of 3 hours every week for 12 weeks and you would think you have done justice to that course. It's not even possible. I tell my students back then, for every 1 hour I teach you in class, you need 3 hours of personal study to get a good grasp of the material. So I tell them that up front, and I give them recommended texts and written assignments for which they hated me. Right? Because I was doing something that other professors were not doing. Why are you different? Right? And in fact, at a point, they sort of made, they went to the department and said, well, we don't like what this guy is doing. He's just making life for us difficult and things like that. But today, many of them look back and say, hey, thank you for being different. Right? Yeah, so anyways, let me just put this to an end. First of all, the professor, the faculty, the lecturer should be willing to do a self-examination, gap analysis, and then after that, the professor should be willing to be open and vulnerable, know where the gaps are, and look beyond the material that he's been told to teach. And once that is done, I think he will be able to give something better to the students.
Yes, and hopefully our policy changes such that teachers are well motivated to want to teach. Because, yes, being a teacher is it's a blessing. It's a blessing and it should not be taken as a job that should be left to people that didn't find a job. It shouldn't be a job for people that I've looked everywhere, I can't find a job, I'll just go teach. We are transforming lives, and that transcends generation. And that's very important. And also teachers also, and this includes, when we say teachers in this space, we're talking to educators in general. Maybe we choose the word educators, which actually encompasses teachers, lecturers, and professors, as the case may be, in your country. We are kingmakers. And they say comfort is the burial place of kings. When you get comfortable with your materials, you don't grow. In engineering, you don't even sit on a material for too long. You have to keep updating it. Things are changing. Technology is changing very quickly. Before you know it, you're left behind. I hope we make that change, soon. I just wanted to go into a little bit of resources in Africa, because you mentioned something about government policies, and I see personally that resources has a lot of impact on what we do as a people, as Africans, as a people, or as as who we are when it comes to innovation within the continent and the likes. And I would ask that question in regard to your research area, which is in wireless communication. And as I spoken to an Indian colleague, and I said that, have you noticed that most people in comp theory, so communication theory, which is also a research space in wireless communication, that does not involve any form of experiments whatsoever, but sometimes we validate our results with experimental results. Most of the people in comp theory are usually people from developing nations or people or countries outside of the West. Would you say that our lack of resources when it comes to labs, or that materials or resources for technology and stuff is lacking in our university? Would you say that's why most of us that do wireless communication actually go to communication theory?
Well, I think the problem starts from our educators. Our educational system is broken. Our teachers were broken in the sense that they were not able to sort of get rounded educations themselves, right? And so what you don't have, you can't give. Now, if you notice, there are a few universities where some of the educators there have had experience outside of Nigeria or outside of Africa. And those people, you would find that they do things a bit differently from the rest of them, right? And so I think it begins from there, right? Now, apart from the fact that education, the system is broken, there is also, it ties together, right, with resources. Now, it's only what you're exposed to that you know exists. Does that make sense? Now, what you're not exposed to, you never know exists, right? If you ask a bird, right, maybe it's a pigeon or whatever kind of bird, and tell the bird, that pigeon, that you can actually nest, you can find a bird that nests in the mountains, at the highest peaks, the pigeon will say, never. How can a bird fly that high? It'll lose, oxygen. It can't survive. It will just fall back to the ground. And then someone comes and says, well, I have seen the eagle. The eagle is a bird. It nests in the mountains, right? And so it's the level of exposure that determines what resources is available to you. And I think that's where the problem comes from, right? Which is why you find that the lowest hanging fruits is where a lot of us just sort of go to, right? Yeah. I would think that's where the problem comes from. And of course, it's sad. If you go to universities today, the laboratories, particularly in engineering, they spend a lot of money, but what they come back to you with is tools for teaching that are dated, that are 30 years old, 40 years old, 25 years old. And someone will tell you, when I did my undergraduate in 1985, we used this equipment. This is so wonderful. It will take you back to the basics. But the question is, beyond that point, what benefits do you get? Right. So exposure, and then willingness to be open to change, right? These things affect access to resources, and in turn, that limits us, to whatever space we can lay our hands on that comes easy to us.
That's actually quite profound, because you said the low-hanging fruits. Because even for people that work in theory and they work with a lot of maths, not many people can explain the physical meaning behind these equations and these formulas and these theorems, and it's interesting to know that all of these equations have physical meaning.
Yeah,
they all have physical meaning, but yet we are made to see them as equations and formulas and theorems and just stay by it. What do they mean? And that's one thing that is very different in the West. And that's when you even teach in the West, you see that the approach of a student to content is different. You're not just there to show formulas and theories, you have to tie it to what it really means and how you came about it. How is this physically represented in an environment, let's say, when it comes to engineering? And I hope we get there soon. And like I said, the goal here, my takeaway here is that gap analysis for students, for teachers, I'd say, for educators. Analyzing our gaps, understanding you don't know, and realizing that it's okay to not know.
Right. You see, it's interesting as you're talking about, these things. My mind goes very quickly to one of my professors, during my undergrad studies. His name is Professor Ayo Babalola. He's a professor of physics. If I were to pick one of the best courses I took in the university, they would be his courses. You know why? He understood the physical implication of everything he taught as a physicist. He taught me quantum physics and quantum mechanics, and I will never forget those experiences. And it's interesting because this man worked with the likes of, Shockley. If you remember Shockley from Transistor, he worked with Shockley at some point in his career. He would come to class and tell us stories about how his office was just next to the office of Shockley and all of that. And that was interesting. Now, he was the first person who, brought to us the idea of how erroneous, people could be, and they would do that in a very flagrant manner, and without regard for without regard for how people's minds could be irritated. There was this case that happened when the Nigerian satellite that was launched lost orbit, and the minister then for communication came and said that our satellite was parked in space, and this man came to class and he said, "Can you imagine what your minister of communication said?" He said, "Our satellite was parked in space." Is there a car park in space for the satellites? And I will not forget that particular day. It was interesting. So, but this is somebody, just to say that is somebody who understood, who had a good, understanding of the material he taught, and it reflected on all of us that were students. Anyways, I just wanted to chip that in, and add that to the mix. Right. Well, closing remarks. What will I say? I think it's important for every student to own his or her own journey. Own your journey. Know where you want to be. What inspires you? Who inspires you? What those people who inspires you? What have they done? How was their journey? What do they know today? Where are they today? Look their journey up. If you can reach out to them for mentorship, reach out to them for mentorship, for guidance, and tailor your journey according to the best practice that exists within that space. Right? It will take a while to build up, to that level where you're well-rounded, but there is no small step in that journey. Right? So I'd say, let every student own their journey. Forget about what happens or does not happen in the universities, the system back in Africa. You own your journey. Where do you want to be the next 10 years? And begin to work your way to that place that you want to be.
And thank you. And that's why at We Guide, we actually have a free mentorship program for all African students around the world that are looking to get guidance, get accountability, being able to streamline what they want. Because of the noise everywhere, you begin to hear things around data analysis, data management, data engineering, data that, for example. And you're so confused. At We Guide, we're able to provide you that help and that guidance to kind of put in line, put in perspective that which you desire, identifying your strengths so that we are able to then align your skills for you. It's a free program. You can visit our website You can see that in the description of this video. And thank you again, Dr. Tolulope Adesina, for the time to share your experience with us. We really appreciate also your service with us, being a mentor at We Guide Learning Initiative. We're going to leave Dr. Tolu's the link to his bio, his accounts, his projects, if you'd like to visit to also see what he does. And if you want to have some time with him, you can check on his calendar on We Guide Learning Initiative website. If you do find a space there, and then book some time to have some conversation with him. Thank you again, Dr. Tolu. We appreciate you, but thank you. And we're so honored to have you as part of our team.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate this.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us again today. Until next time, this is Guiding Voices, where we celebrate mentorship, perseverance, and the transformative power of education. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye for now.